Hello and welcome to this hour of World News on the World Today on Channels Television. I'm Amarachi Ubani here in Lagos. Here's what's coming up on the program. Jizelle Pelicot thanks supporters after her ex-husband, Dominique Pelicot, was jailed for 20 years for drugging her and recruiting strangers to rape her. Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country should have invaded Ukraine earlier and made more preparations before the full-scale invasion in 2022. Plus, UnitedHealth CEO murder suspect Luigi Mangione appears in court over his New York extradition. Let's begin the world today. Dominique Pelicot, the 72-year-old who pimped his ex-wife to 50 men in France over a period of 10 years, has been jailed for 20 years after he drugged her and raped her and invited strangers to also abuse her. Dominique was found guilty of all charges by a judge in Avignon in southern France and cried in court as he was sentenced to the maximum term. He was on trial with 50 other men, all of whom were found guilty of at least one charge, although their jail terms were less than what prosecutors had demanded. Jizelle and her children looked emotionless as the verdicts were read out, occasionally glancing at the defendants and resting their heads against the wall. The convictions bring to an end France's largest ever rape trial, which over the course of 3 months has shocked the country and the world. Jizelle herself said the trial was a very difficult ordeal, but she did not regret taking her former husband to court. She's become a symbol of female courage and resilience during the 3-month trial, and crowds of supporters outside the courthouse in the southern city of Avignon cheered as she appeared after the verdicts had been read out. The trial has triggered protest rallies around France in support of Jizelle and spurred soul-searching, including a debate on whether to update France's rape law, which at present makes no mention of sex should involve consent. Dominique's lawyer, Beatriz Zavaro, says her client is considering lodging an appeal. He, as well as the other 50 men on trial, have at least 10 days to decide on this. In her words, at the start of the arguments, I said Mr. Pelicot was not necessarily the orchestral conductor and the others were not the musicians. Yet I think with this conviction, the court has condemned the conductor by differentiating between him and the different musicians that make up the orchestra. We're not allowed to criticize a court decision. The only recourse we have to challenge it is to possibly appeal. And once more, I repeat, we will use a 10 days delay we've been given to counter this decision and see if we must be subjected once more to a popular jury in the months to come. All Pelicot's 50 co-defendants were also found guilty of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. The VOA's Lisa Bryant joins us now from Paris. Lisa, great to see you. And I'm so glad we've come to the end of this harrowing but very revealing experience in France. One woman's experience, 50 men. It's just horrific just thinking about it. And yet Jizelle says she does not want to be seen as an icon. I think even read she's saying that she actually regrets having done this in the first place. What impact has this had, once again, on, the people of France as well as the rest of the world?
Hi, Amarachi, and it's good to be here again. Yeah, it has had a big mark on France, and it's interesting to know that, there was the Me Too movement. It was the movement that came after, this case on a major Hollywood star, and it sort of boomeranged around the world. And this was, the issue of violence against women, sexual violence in particular, and that did have a mark, but nothing like this trial. We'll see how this reverberates in the months to come, but it has really, really galvanized certainly women in France. Jizelle Pelicot says she doesn't want to be an icon, but she did decide to come out in public, make this a public trial. She did not have to do this. This was her choice. And because she felt this is nothing to be shamed about. You know, the people that should be shamed should be the perpetrators of sexual assault. And I think that really came out loud and clear. And, you know, over time, she became this icon because she was so courageous. She was so dignified. She was, you know, very, you know, nicely dressed all the time. I mean, that's a small thing, but that must have taken a huge amount of courage. And I was reading some of the, you know, sort of anecdotes from people who had been there day by day at this trial, and how she started by coming in with these dark sunglasses, you know, sort of John Lennon sort of sunglasses, and it was kind of a shield. But bit by bit, she started to take them off, and you saw the pictures you guys are showing right now. She has no sunglasses. She's talking to the public, and her idea is that other people, other women who have also been sexually abused, who have been afraid to speak out, she was hoping that this will give them the courage to do so right now.
And she doesn't even look overwhelmed by what has happened. I think that's the unique thing about, you know, Jizelle Pelicot's trial, and the courage and the bravery that she has shown through all of this. She really hasn't even looked half of what she's been through. And she's also been very brave about releasing those recordings done by her husband in court, put them in as evidence, having the lawyers watch them, have the courts watch the blow-by-blow accounts by each of the men who had, you know, either raped or assaulted her, and then having to face all of this all over again. It's almost like having to watch something about yourself that you couldn't see at the time it was happening. How are we so sure, Lisa, that this is not a flash-in-the-pan moment for the French judiciary system, as well as a precedent that it sets, not just for France, but now for the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to wait and see. I mean, there were protests outside of the courtroom by people who were very disappointed in some ways by the verdict, that some of the men were not getting the sentences, the top sentences that the prosecutors had recommended. So, you know, it may be, you know, a flash in the pan moment. I suspect not. I think that we're going to see more people, more women, but, you know, basically people who feel that they've been victims of sexual violence speaking out. We'll see if this happens. But you know, feminists or women's rights activists are saying this has got to be not just a one-off. You know, some are saying, look, the whole justice system needs to change. You know, people, judges and lawyers, but judges especially, need to be specialized in the issues of sexual violence. And they say that's not happening now. And again, many are disappointed that the sentences, not for Jizelle Pelicot's husband, who got the maximum sentence, which is 20 years in jail, but for some of the others, that they got off with just, let's say, 3 to 5 year sentences, up to 15. But certainly not the maximum that had been recommended. So yes, it is a wait and see. It could be a flash in the pan, as you say, but I suspect that we're going to have more and more people coming out, and that it will not be a flash in the pan. Whether it's going to end up being extensive reforms, a different way that men or, you know, anybody who is in a dominant position looks at sexual violence, that probably will take a long time, but we will see what happens, because it certainly has shaken France.
Lisa, walk us through the moment-by-moment process it was for Jizelle and for Dominique in the court today, as the judge read out the verdict on Dominique. What was the expression on Giselle's face, and what do you think was going through her mind at that moment?
I was not at the courtroom, so I was just like reading some of my, you know, I was reading some of the accounts after the fact. I think for Dominique Pelicot, I'm sure that there was not much surprise. You know, he had pleaded guilty. Apparently, he may consider, you know, asking for, you know, another review of the sentence. I suspect for Jizelle Pelicot, it was an affirmation. It was relief. I know that her children are disappointed, or at least that's what sources close to them say, that like with the feminists and the activists, they're disappointed that the sentence wasn't tougher. But she says she is accepting the verdict. And I can only hope, or think that perhaps she has a certain peace of mind that there was justice done. We are going to see what happens next, including with the other people on trial, about 50 other men who have also been sentenced, and whether they're going to appeal, or Dominique Pelicot. But I think for this, it's been a grinding, long trial. I can only imagine she must be feeling relief it's over, relief that her ex-husband has been sentenced, and probably is going to be facing the sort of huge task of moving forward, the what next. She says that her life has been destroyed, but many people are saying, is not destroyed. So, rebuilding her life, and we'll see how this works.
Indeed, many days ahead to determine this. But according to Dominique's lawyer, they have about 10 days to appeal this verdict. Do you think that could change anything?
Well, yeah, he could appeal the verdict. He could say it's like too, he had admitted guilt, but perhaps he can appeal, saying it's too, it's too tough. And then it would have to drag through a lengthy process. I mean, it would go to an appeals trial. The last sort of court of last resort is the court of cassation. So, these kinds of trials can take years. So it is possible. It's possible that some of the other 50 will also appeal. So it may not be over. But let's just say the first huge trial is over. We will see what's going to happen next.
Now, one of the issues that also supported this rape appeal and this trial of Jizelle is the use of drugs. And Dominique did admit to drugging his wife to the point where she really had no idea what was going on. What did the court say about the use of drugs, especially in a scenario like this that she went through? What would be the ruling going forward?
I'm not sure, because I'm not a legal expert on this sort of thing, but I think the question about the use of drugs is obviously, it's a bad thing to do. I'm sure they're going to be revising it. I think this is going to be another look about it. My sense also, one of the things that this trial stirred up was questions about, why, for example, her doctor and others, health experts that she went to, because she was wondering what was wrong with her. Yeah. She had lost a lot of weight. She couldn't remember, obviously, what had happened to her during all these times that she was raped or sexually abused, and that why nobody had suspected that she could have been drugged. That it took so many years for the evidence to come out, and came out almost by fluke because her husband had been filming some women, trying to film them under their skirts, and then the police got a hold of all these videos, and then this whole thing sort of blew up. But over those years, almost a decade, she'd been going to various health specialists, and it wasn't diagnosed. And this is definitely also within the medical community, started soul searching about why she hadn't been diagnosed, why there hadn't been sort of a closer look to what could have happened to her. And I think that also would be one of the things that will be examined moving forward, and probably also the legal aspects as well.
So a huge relief for France, would you say, at least with this trial finally over, even though there's possibility of appeal coming in the next few days. I wondered whether you've had a chance, Lisa, to take a look at media across Europe and how they're reacting to this historic moment in France.
It's been, there's huge coverage. I've been looking at some of the European and obviously some of the U.S. press. It was briefly, I don't know about now, but on the online version of the New York Times, it was, at the top. I suspect that we're going to be seeing, also questions about, okay, with a lot of these things, exactly like the Me Too movement is, what's happening, in our patch, in our country. It's gotten, the reactions have been amazing. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, congratulated and said, thank you, Jizelle Pelicot, for, turning the tables around, at issue is the abuser, not what's happened to the women or whether their tales are credible, but the focus should be on the person who's abusing and not the person who is abused. So I think that these kinds of reactions, especially once, the first, you get the headline news, and then in the hours and days to come, then you get the analysis and the reactions from various specialists in different countries. And I think they're going to be large, and it could be interesting to see, how this is going to be sort of unfold, in Europe, in Africa, in the United States, in terms of giving women also the courage in other countries, not just in France. I mean, she wasn't just, I think Jizelle Pelicot, her message wasn't just for women in France. She was talking about women or men as well who have been sexually abused or in any kind of way, to also speak out, to not be ashamed, because the people who should be ashamed are the ones who are perpetrating this.
I guess women's rights are still evolving in many parts of the world. Lisa, thanks again for speaking with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We'll stay a bit longer in France, as President Emmanuel Macron today paid a visit to a hospital in Mayotte 5 days after Cyclone Chido hit the French Overseas Department, causing mayhem and killing possibly thousands. After his arrival by helicopter, President Macron spoke with locals who complained about the unknown death toll of the tragedy, some carrying photos of missing friends or relatives. The human toll of the disaster remains unknown at this stage. Only 31 deaths have been confirmed by hospitals, but authorities fear that the death toll could be in the hundreds or even thousands, as devastated areas remain inaccessible and heavy rain is expected in the north of the country. The situation is made more difficult by uncertainty around Mayotte's exact population. While official statistics put it at 321,000, many believe it is much higher due to undocumented immigration, mainly from Comoros and Madagascar. Now, the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is deeply concerned about the impact of Cyclone Chido in vulnerable communities in Mozambique, which has been hit by Cyclone Chido. The UN agency says it's working closely now with the government and humanitarian partners to provide immediate assistance. Within the first 48 hours, UNHCR provided assistance at the largest accommodation center in Pemba, the capital of Cabo Delgado, where more than 2,600 people received emergency relief and essential items such as blankets, sleeping mats, mosquito nets, and emergency shelter supplies. UNHCR is also coordinating the provision of vital protection services to the most vulnerable. While the full extent of the damage in rural areas remains unclear, preliminary assessments suggest that around 190,000 people urgently need humanitarian assistance. 33 schools have been affected and nearly 10,000 homes were destroyed. Some villages, very few houses remain standing. Years of conflict, however, forces displacement and economic hardship has left communities in the region increasingly vulnerable. For many displaced families, Cyclone Chido has caused renewed hardship, washing away what little they had managed to rebuild.
I'm here in Mekufi, one of the hardest hit districts in northern Mozambique, where Tropical Cyclone Chido, a powerful Category 4 storm, made landfall earlier this week. In Mekufi alone, nearly every shelter has been damaged or destroyed. Entire communities have been flattened by the storm's torrential rains and relentless winds. Families who had so little to begin with now find themselves with nothing. This is not the first time people are forced to flee here. Close to 300,000 people are IDPs in the area, many already displaced by the conflict in northern Mozambique. They had fled violence only to now face yet another crisis. Once again, they've been forced to leave everything behind. The increasing effects of climate change are a reality for countries like Mozambique. And the people are the ones who suffer the most, the harsh consequences of choices they did not make. Their needs here are urgent: shelter, clean water, food, health services, and protection. UNHCR and partners are on the ground working tirelessly to deliver life-saving assistance. But more support is needed. These families have already endured so much. They need our help, now more than ever.
I take a detour now to India, where the search for survivors of a deadly boat accident in Mumbai continues today, a day after a naval speedboat lost control and collided with a private vessel, killing at least 13 people, 3 Navy personnel among them. The ferry was taking tourists to the nearby Elephanta Caves, famed for their rock arts, but it capsized as a result of the collision and 114 people were rescued. Navy and Coast Guard vessels join in to search the harbor for at least 2 people still believed to be missing. That's an adult and a child, according to one of the deputy commissioners of police in Mumbai. Welcome back to The World Today. The suspect in the killing of UnitedHealth Group executive Brian Thompson arrived at a Pennsylvania court this morning for a hearing on a request by New York to extradite him to Manhattan to face murder charges. The 26-year-old Luigi Mangione was arrested in Altoona, Pennsylvania on December 9, 5 days after Thompson was fatally shot outside a Manhattan hotel before a company conference in what law enforcement officials have called a premeditated assassination. In Pennsylvania, Mangione has been charged with forgery and illegal possession of an unlicensed gun. A preliminary hearing on the Pennsylvania charges is scheduled for today at the Blair County Courthouse. A second hearing to discuss extradition to New York is then scheduled in the same courthouse before Judge David Castiglio. Under Pennsylvania law, Mangione can waive his right to extradition proceedings if he tells a judge that he consents to being transferred to New York custody. A grand jury in New York has indicted Mangione on 11 counts, including first-degree murder and murder as an act of terrorism. Mangione has been in jail since his arrest. His New York defense lawyer, Karen Friedman, has declined to comment on the charges against him. Let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, who joins us now, of course, from Washington. Maria, great to see you. Mangione has, well, there's talks about his extradition to New York. Why is this an issue, and why are authorities, still having this discussion about him? It seemed like such a cut and dried situation to have him extradited to New York, where the crime was committed.
Yeah, so we know that he was not wanting to actually be extradited to New York. He wanted to not have the case held there. This is because New York is going to have most of the information, obviously, because he was able to escape law enforcement in New York. Obviously, he's a bit concerned as to what his potential fate could be by being extradited to New York. But we know that New York is a location where the crime was committed. We also know that this will provide law enforcement with the ability to be able to provide information they have been able to retrieve over the last few days that would lead to some of the motives and cause and exactly what happened and how this was able to occur.
I remember when Mangione was first arrested, Maria, you did say that the period of time it took to finally nail him was considered too long in the eyes of law enforcement. Usually within 2 days, so thereabouts, there is, a suspect in custody. Could he have been picked up much earlier, do you think? And do you think that law enforcement is fully convinced now that he is the man that is in the pictures that they have been distributing?
I think they're pretty confident. I don't think we would get to this point without them being confident in that piece. I think where the question, though, is that, to your point, is that due to the extenuating period of time, yes, New York is a very large city. There's very hard to track someone in that city. But due to the nature of this type of crime and the individual that was murdered in this crime, it does bring great question to how he was able to escape the city of New York. And I think that is, too, going to be a part of this case. You're going to see probably that a lot of that conversation and discussion very early in his indictment is expected that he will actually be in federal court by the end of before the end of today, which will be Thursday Eastern Standard Time in New York City. So this is going to, I think, definitely be one that most of this country will be watching, just to see what do they know that is any different than what was known the day that the killing occurred, and if there was information that could have secured his arrest much sooner.
You know, what is still being speculated is the motive behind the killing of Brian Thompson. That is still a question with no answers. And I wondered if perhaps many days after Brian Thompson's murder, there could be something, that could help to drive the conversation around that.
Yes, it's highly likely that part of why New York is pushing so hard for the extradition, why he potentially doesn't want to be or did not want to be extradited to New York, is because they might have information that could provide a greater scope as to actual motives and actually what occurred. There's also very clear speculations that there could be more than just him involved in this, and this was clearly a targeted attack. And so what is all the information around it, and are there other CEOs of major companies in the United States at all in danger? And I think that's the greatest question at the time.
Yeah, I know that health insurance CEOs are currently considering themselves endangered species at the moment because they really don't know who has a grievance against them. Marjorie, however, comes from a very privileged family in Baltimore. They're quite wealthy. Some of the few properties they own are the Turf Valley Country Club. They also developed the surrounding golf course community. They own the Hayesfield Country Club. They also founded the Lorien Health Services. Very well-to-do family it is. So Luigi's arrest must have tainted the family's image. Have they said anything regarding this?
Yes, as you mentioned, those communities, even though in Baltimore and they're about an hour from Washington, are very well known in this area, and are, to your point, they're extremely wealthy communities. And the family has been very quiet. I think that this is a very tough situation for them. The mother did obviously state that she did recognize her son, but as far as where they stand, the lawyers, I'm sure, are advising them to be very cautious about the level of communication they specifically have with the media. Because as you said, this is not just his challenge. This is going to be something that's going to impact the family as a whole and potentially impact some of the properties that they do own.
And just to be clear, Maria, authorities are treating this as just a, one-off situation, a lone wolf situation, not as an act of terrorism.
Yeah. Well, after September 11th, the idea around terrorism and the qualifications for terrorism were broadened. And so this could potentially, depending on how the prosecution brings forth the case, we could be looking at additional charges around that would be looking at an act of terrorism due to the position of the individual that was killed and the targeted attack that is presumed to be what actually occurred. So we see some broadening of the scope once we do hear what the grand jury, or once we hear what they say in court later this afternoon.
And when we take a look at Luigi's background, it's not just his family that's wealthy. He himself is also a pretty stand-up, straight-up guy. He's a valedictorian. He's been praised for his intellect and ambition. He went to an Ivy League school, we understand. Can authorities find anything untoward in his background that may, give some inkling as to why he killed Brian Thompson?
Well, we've spent some time over the past, feels like not that long, but it's been probably a couple of years now, with the challenges around mental health, especially in the United States when we talk about these, whether it's a targeted attack, whether it's a mass shooting. And I think that's really what they're going to be looking at is, to your point, he's been valedictorian. He's had all types of academic accolades, attended some of the best schools in the world. And so when you think of that, you don't equate that to someone who is a murderer. And so I think that's where we're going to be looking. We're going to be seeing more information coming out around his mental health stability, if he has had any mental health challenges over the last few years, and if there were any signs throughout his academic career of any mental health potential issues there.
And I understand America is a bit divided about, his arrest and also his appearance in court. Tell us some more about that.
Yes, it's very interesting. We've been watching. People are a bit concerned about or concerned about how he's actually being treated. And I think where many are also standing is that this is a murder that occurred, regardless of where people feel about healthcare in America. We know that healthcare has been a great challenge and a great concern as to how healthcare companies are operating and how people are being able to receive the appropriate medical care and treatment. But I think others are looking at this and they're saying, well, this is a man that was murdered, regardless of how we feel politically about the healthcare system. And so it is a divided idea about this. But I think the way in which if this was due to a healthcare political issue, the way that the act was carried out in the murder of someone, I think, is where most of the country sits.
Maria, thanks again for speaking with us. We have many more days to spend on this story, and the developments will be plenty. Thanks again. Palestinians today inspected damage caused to buildings in Gaza City following an Israeli strike which killed several people. That's according to the health ministry. Mahmoud al-Ghafri, a man who lives nearby, said efforts are still underway to retrieve people under the rubble. In Gaza, medics say at least 13 Palestinians were killed overnight in separate Israeli airstrikes, including on 2 houses in Gaza City and a central camp. Israel launched its air and ground assault on Gaza after Hamas fighters attacked Israeli communities 14 months ago, killing 1,200 people and taking over 250 hostages back to Gaza. Israel says about 100 hostages are still being held, but it's unclear how many are alive. Israel's campaign has killed more than 45,000 Palestinians, displaced most of the 2.3 million population, and reduced much of the coastal enclave to ruins. Meanwhile, Israel says its fighter jets have conducted a series of strikes against military targets in Yemen belonging to the Iran-backed Houthi movement. An Israeli military spokesperson said the targets included Red Sea ports and energy infrastructure in the capital, Sana'a. Houthi-run Al Masirah TV reported that 9 people were killed in the port of Salif and the Ras Isa oil terminal, which are both in Hudaydah province. The strike comes hours after a missile fired from Yemen was intercepted over central Israel. A school and several cars were damaged in Ramat Gan on the edge of Tel Aviv. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that when Israel is acting against Yemen's Houthis, it acts for the entire international community. His comments came in a pre-recorded video statement after Israel launched strikes against ports and energy infrastructure in Houthi-held parts of Yemen. That's earlier today, and threatened more attacks against the Iran-aligned militant group, which has launched hundreds of missiles at Israel over the past year. As Israeli jets were in the air, the Israeli military said it intercepted a missile headed towards central Israel, which destroyed a school building in Ramat Efal in the western part of Tel Aviv, with the military spokesperson describing it as falling shrapnel. The Houthis, who have launched attacks on international shipping near Yemen since November last year in solidarity with Palestinians in Israel's war with Hamas, said they had attacked Tel Aviv overnight, launching 2 ballistic missiles and hitting precise military targets. Well, on to Asia now. A South Korea member of parliament has announced that at least 100 North Korean soldiers have been killed in fighting in Ukraine alone since entering the combat on the Russian side earlier this month. Lee Song-kwon was the one making the disclosure to reporters after Parliament was briefed by the country's National Intelligence Service. He noted another 1,000 fighters had been injured on the battlefield. He said the casualties included high-ranking officials and could be explained by the troops' lack of familiarity with the terrain and with drone warfare. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been speaking at a marathon event in Moscow, saying 3 years of conflict in Ukraine has changed him. The Russian president dropped a bombshell indicating the Ukraine war should have started earlier, and his country should have made more preparations before the full-scale invasion in February of 2022. Mr. Putin made the comment after being asked whether he would do anything different if he could go back in time to the start of the year and change something. He noted that Russia started the campaign without any special preparation because it was impossible to wait and watch the situation deteriorate any further. Now, when asked how the conflict has changed him, Putin said in his words, "We joke now and there is laughter in the hall, but I started joking less and I've almost stopped laughing." Meanwhile, the Russian president says Russian forces are moving towards achieving their primary goals on the battlefield in Ukraine and are taking control of significant territory every day. He says the Russian forces are advancing along the entire battlefront and are reclaiming territory by square kilometer every day. Speaking on the continued issue of the presence of Ukrainian forces in Russia's Kursk region, President Putin says it would definitely be forced out, declining to say exactly when that would happen. Staying with President Vladimir Putin, he's definitely been busy today touching down on the situation in Syria, saying Moscow has not been defeated in Syria and that his country has made proposals to the new rulers in Damascus over Russia's military bases there. Mr. Putin said he'd not yet met with ousted President Bashar al-Assad, but planned to meet him. He also condemned Israel's seizure of territories in Syria, indicating he feels Israel has no intention of withdrawing its troops from Syria. Welcome back to The World Today. We'd like to inform our viewers on the DSTV platform. We'll be going live now to the Lagos House Marina for the first Family of Lagos State event, which is the Christmas Carol of 9 Lessons with the theme "Unto Us a Child is Born." That's just for our viewers on DSTV. For our viewers on other platforms, we'll continue with The World Today. And we're continuing now in in Ukraine, where the president, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has been attending an EU meeting in Brussels in Belgium. He's met with top EU officials on the need for more support for Ukraine, a meeting taking place as European Union leaders aim to send a clear signal to U.S. President-elect Donald Trump about their continued support for Ukraine. Zelenskyy says unity between the EU and United States is necessary to bring peace to Ukraine. Also attending that meeting in Brussels is the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who says solutions to the war between Ukraine and Russia should not be decided over the heads of the Ukrainians. In his words, the Ukrainians have to figure out for themselves what their parts are, and that's why I think it's completely inappropriate that some are now discussing what should follow as a third and fourth step. He's advocating for lasting military support for Ukraine while also supporting a clear stance against an escalation of the war and a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has been attending the cultural performance in Macau, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the region's handover from Portugal to China. The event President Xi was at today showcased Macau's unique cultural heritage with performances that blended Chinese and Portuguese elements, as well as performances that highlighted the country's development under Chinese governance. President Xi arrived in Macau yesterday to mark a quarter-century of Beijing's rule over the former Portuguese enclave, and is likely to urge further diversification from its casino industry during his 3-day visit. A special administrative region of China, Macau is the only country or only place in China Not mainland China, however, where gambling is legal and its economy is heavily dependent on the casino industry, which contributes about 80% of the regional tax revenue. Back here in Africa, Egypt's Prime Minister has been forced to briefly pause a televised news conference right after experiencing a spell of dizziness. For a 58-year-old, Mustafa Madbouli was speaking in Cairo Wednesday night during his weekly cabinet news briefing when he felt unwell, suddenly grabbing the microphone and asking for a pause. We see lawmakers there concerned getting up to attend to the Prime Minister. He went on with the briefing after he began to feel better a few minutes later. Hundreds of people gathered in Johannesburg, South Africa for the Alkebulan Immigrants Global Heritage Festival under the theme Celebrating Diversity and Building Networks to Transcend Borders. Organizers describe it as more than just a ceremony, saying that it's a celebration of journeys, achievements and positive contributions reflecting the spirit of unity and Ubuntu. The event offers an opportunity for diverse communities to come together, for attendees to underscore the importance of unity amongst African countries. Well, our correspondent Innocent Simosa has more.
It was a day to celebrate African heritage, unity and diversity. With vibrant dance performances, Africans gathered to honor the Alkebulan Festival, a celebration of unity and cultural diversity. I took the opportunity to ask attendees what they love most about being African.
Oh my God, I love everything about being an African. I love how we do things, how we explore, how we're willing to learn about different cultures, different backgrounds, because we as African, we have different cultures, we have different dances.
Mainly the tapestry of how we as Africans communicate through dance and drama. So being here, looking at different instruments, looking at the skills, I felt like I needed that to take my mind all around out of the busy world that I enjoy every day.
The event featured the Alkebulan Kemetic Experience, a one-stop cultural experience offering a wide range of African clothing. Some attendees emphasized the importance of unity among African nations.
Unity is the password for every success and development. We believe that Africa was united before colonialism, and after colonialism, the unity was missed.
Africans to be united. First of all, each one must have self-love for themselves. Then when you have love for yourself, whomever next you see is a friend. You are friends, you welcome, you chat, and you compare notes.
I think firstly, we have to first learn about each other. We need to have tolerance, Ubuntu, for ourselves. We must remember that we come from the same soil. The fact that we are divided by borders doesn't mean anything. It's a system that was put in place.
African cultures are also renowned for their clan names and their rich traditions of storytelling.
That's who I am.
Madam Songma, before Zangmo Bichi Sig in farmer, Tabi Bontu, Ta Africa Bontu, Tabiba Kongnu, and Tabiba Strong.
From the heart of Johannesburg, the Alkebulan Festival was a vivid reminder of the power of unity, heritage, and the shared spirit that binds African nations together. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Innocent Samos, Channels Television News.
Well, here's when talking to Santa is for a good cause. That's what Ask Santa is doing. It's an AI program that allows kids to talk to Santa Claus, so all the while raising money for type 1 diabetes research. The creators say it's not just another Christmas gimmick, but rather a fun and interactive AI program. A $5 donation to help fund Breakthrough TIDS research grants access to a one-on-one conversation with Santa Claus. Wait a minute, is that a real Santa Claus? Well, the magic behind Ask Santa is Storyfile's conversational video technology. Using AI combined with hours of filmed content, it creates a real-time interaction that makes children feel they're really conversing with Santa, all in a safe environment. Storyfile first developed Ask Santa during the COVID-19 pandemic. This year, they provided it to Breakthrough T1D to help with their fundraising efforts with a $5 donation per user, helping fund Breakthrough T1D's research.
The way Ask Santa appears on the screen, he is a person. He's the real Santa Claus, and it's so comforting and so real, and he's just delightful. Just to see the joy on their faces when they ask crazy questions like, how many reindeer do you have? Or what's Mrs. Claus doing? Or when did you become Santa Claus? It's amazing, and the kids have loved it. The technology behind Ask Santa. Storyfile interviewed Santa for hours and hours on end. There is no going out to the internet like ChatGPT or other AI platforms. The questions are all in the database. Santa can't hallucinate. He can't make up crazy questions from ChatGPT. It is a safe and secure platform for your kids to talk to Santa. Breakthrough T1D is accelerating breakthroughs to cure type 1 diabetes every single day. We are seeing breakthroughs on so many fronts. If you make the $5 donation to Breakthrough T1D to have a conversation with Ask Santa, 100% of those proceeds will go to fund type 1 diabetes research.
In the meantime, Santa Claus has been really busy helping distribute Christmas trees in Jerusalem ahead of the holiday season in the Holy Land. Jerusalem municipality invites residents to collect Christmas trees this year ahead of the holiday, free of charge. This year, a man dressed as Santa, thankfully it's not the real Santa, but he's just dressed like Santa. Well, you get the point. Well, he joined the municipality workers sending out kisses and waves to bypassers. Before taking a walk along the walls of Jerusalem's old city, he spoke about his message being the message of peace from the heart of the world. That's Jerusalem. He then climbed the walls, walking on the ancient stones and bathing in the rays of the winter sun, overlooking the city and waving.
This year is a different year. My message is the message of peace from the heart of the Lord, Jerusalem, in the Holy Land. Merry Christmas, everybody. I love you all.
I guess some people asked for Christmas trees this year. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.